Sarah Martinez had always been smaller than everyone else. At 5 feet 4 inches and 120 pounds, she looked more like someone who belonged in a library than on a military base. But looks could be deceiving, and Sarah carried secrets that her new classmates at the elite military academy had no idea about. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine grounds of Blackwater Military Academy as Sarah walked toward the dormitory building. Her single duffel bag contained everything she owned, which wasn't much. Unlike the other students who arrived with their families and multiple suitcases, Sarah had come alone. She preferred it that way. The academy was known for producing some of the finest military officers in the country. Students came from wealthy families, military dynasties, and political connections. Sarah came from none of those backgrounds. She had earned her spot through pure academic excellence and a recommendation letter that nobody at the school had bothered to read carefully. As she climbed the steps to the dormitory, Sarah could hear voices from inside. Loud, confident voices that belonged to people who had never doubted their place in the world. She took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The common room fell silent as she entered. 20 pairs of eyes turned to look at her, sizing her up in seconds. Sarah had experienced this before. The quick glances that took in her small frame, her plain clothes, her lack of expensive accessories. The immediate dismissal that followed. Well, said a tall blonde girl near the window. Looks like they're really letting anyone in these days. The girl's name was Madison Thornfield, and Sarah had already learned about her from the academy's website. Madison's father was a 4-star general, her grandfather had been a war hero, and her family had donated millions to the school. Madison wore her privilege like armor, and she wasn't shy about using it as a weapon. "I'm Sarah Martinez," Sarah said quietly, setting her bag down near an empty bunk. "I guess I'll be staying here." Madison laughed, and several other students joined in. "Martinez? Let me guess, scholarship kid?" Affirmative action admission. The cruelty in her voice was casual, practiced. This wasn't the first time Madison had used someone's background against them. Sarah didn't respond. She had learned long ago that defending herself only made things worse. Instead, she began unpacking her few belongings, carefully placing each item in her assigned locker. Her movements were precise, economical. Everything had its place. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Madison said, stepping closer. "Don't you think you should at least try to fit in? Maybe get some decent clothes? This isn't some public school where you can just show up looking like that." Sarah's hands paused for just a moment as she folded a plain gray t-shirt. The shirt was worn soft from many washings, but it was clean and it fit her properly. She had learned to value function over fashion a long time ago. "I think my clothes are fine," Sarah said, still not turning around. Madison's friends exchanged glances. They weren't used to being ignored, especially not by someone they considered beneath them. In their world, hierarchy mattered, and Sarah was clearly at the bottom. "You think your clothes are fine?" Madison repeated, her voice rising. "Look around. This is Blackwater Academy, not some community college. We have standards here." Sarah finally turned around. Her dark eyes met Madison's blue ones steadily. There was something in Sarah's gaze that made Madison take an unconscious step back, though she couldn't have said what it was. "I understand the standards," Sarah said. "That's why I'm here." The comment hit its mark. Madison's face flushed red. She had assumed Sarah was there because of some diversity program, not because she had actually earned her place. The idea that this small, plainly dressed girl might be as qualified as she was felt like a personal insult. "We'll see about that," Madison muttered. But she turned away, dismissing Sarah with a wave of her hand. The rest of the day passed in a blur of orientation activities, campus tours, and administrative meetings. Sarah kept to herself, observing everything, saying little. She watched how the other students interacted, how they formed their social groups, how they established their pecking order. It was like watching a nature documentary about pack animals. By evening, the dormitory had settled into its natural rhythm. Madison held court near the windows, surrounded by her loyal followers. Other groups had formed around shared interests or backgrounds. And then there was Sarah, sitting alone on her bunk, reading a worn paperback novel. "What's she reading?" one of Madison's friends whispered, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "Probably something sad and depressing," Madison replied. "Poor scholarship kids always read depressing books." It helps them feel sorry for themselves. Sarah didn't look up from her book, but her jaw tightened slightly. She was actually reading a technical manual on advanced tactical operations that had been disguised with a romance novel cover. It was an old habit from her previous life, one that had kept her secrets safe for years. The next morning brought their first physical training session. All students at Blackwater Academy were required to maintain excellent physical fitness, regardless of their intended career path. The academy believed that discipline of the body led to discipline of the mind. As the students gathered on the track in their matching gray PT uniforms, Sarah looked even smaller than usual. The academy's physical training uniforms were designed for average-sized bodies, and on Sarah, everything seemed to hang loose. Her running shoes were plain black, obviously bought for function rather than style. "Look at that," Madison said to her friend Jessica. "She looks like she's wearing her big brother's clothes." The physical training instructor was Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a compact man with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. He had been training military officers for over 20 years, and he could spot trouble before it started. "Today we're starting with a basic fitness assessment," he announced. 5-mile run, followed by strength and agility tests. This will establish your baseline fitness level and determine what additional training you'll need. The students lined up at the starting line. Madison positioned herself near the front, confident in her abilities. She had been running track since middle school and had won several state championships. Jessica and their other friends clustered around her, forming a natural running group. Sarah lined up near the back, drawing little attention. A few students glanced at her with pity, assuming she would struggle to keep up. One boy named Trevor actually looked concerned and started to say something encouraging, but Sarah's expression discouraged conversation. "On my mark," Sergeant Rodriguez called out. "Go." The group took off together, quickly spreading out along the track. Madison immediately moved to the front, setting a challenging pace that she knew would leave the weaker runners behind. This was her chance to establish dominance, to show everyone what real fitness looked like. For the first mile, Sarah stayed with the middle of the pack, running easily behind a group of boys who were chatting as they ran. Her breathing was controlled, her stride efficient. She looked like she was barely trying, which annoyed Madison even more. "Is she even sweating?" Madison asked Jessica as they passed the mile marker. By the second mile, the group had stretched out significantly. Madison was still in the lead, but she was working harder now. Behind her, several of the stronger male students had formed a chase group. Sarah had moved up slightly but was still running alone, maintaining the same steady pace. The third mile brought the first casualties. 2 students dropped out with side stitches, and several others had slowed to a walk. Madison was still leading, but her form was beginning to deteriorate. Her breathing had become labored, and sweat was streaming down her face. Sarah, meanwhile, looked exactly the same as she had at the start. Her pace hadn't varied by more than a few seconds per mile, and her form remained textbook perfect. She had moved up to 5th place without seeming to try. How was she doing that? Jessica panted as she fell back toward the middle of the pack. Madison didn't answer because she was too focused on breathing. The pace she had set to show off was now working against her. She could feel Sarah getting closer, and the knowledge that the scholarship girl might actually beat her was infuriating. During the 4th mile, something shifted. Sarah had been content to stay behind, to avoid drawing attention to herself. But Madison's constant comments over the past 2 days had been wearing on her patience. And when she saw Madison stumble slightly, showing clear signs of fatigue, something inside her clicked. Sarah changed gears so smoothly that it was almost imperceptible. Her stride lengthened slightly, her cadence increased, and she began moving through the field like she was running a completely different race. She passed the 4th place runner without him even noticing. Then 3rd place. Then 2nd. Madison heard footsteps approaching and glanced back. When she saw Sarah closing in, her eyes widened in disbelief. This couldn't be happening. She was Madison Thornfield. She didn't lose to people like Sarah Martinez. "No way," Madison gasped, trying to increase her pace. But her body had nothing left to give. She had run too hard too early, burning through her energy reserves in the first 3 miles. Sarah, on the other hand, had been running within herself the entire time, and now she was ready to show what she could really do. Sarah pulled alongside Madison with half a mile to go. For a moment, they ran together, and Madison could see that Sarah wasn't even breathing hard. Her face showed no strain, no desperation. She looked like she could run another 5 miles without breaking a sweat. Impossible, Madison wheezed. Sarah glanced over at her, and, for just a second, Madison saw something in those dark eyes that made her blood run cold. It wasn't anger or determination. It was the calm, professional assessment of someone who had been underestimated before and knew exactly how to use it to her advantage. Then, Sarah was gone, pulling away from Madison so effortlessly that it looked like Madison had stopped running. Sarah crossed the finish line a full 30 seconds ahead of the next runner, barely breathing hard. She didn't celebrate or even look particularly pleased. She just walked over to the water station and took a small sip, waiting for the others to finish. Madison stumbled across the line nearly a minute later, her face red and her lungs burning. She bent over with her hands on her knees, gasping for air. The humiliation was almost worse than the physical exhaustion. She had been beaten by someone she had dismissed as weak, and everyone had seen it happen. Sergeant Rodriguez was watching Sarah with interest. In 20 years of training military officers, he had learned to recognize different types of fitness. There was athlete fitness, which was what Madison had shown, impressive but specific to certain activities. There was natural fitness, which some people were born with. And then there was operational fitness, which came from doing real work under real pressure. Sarah Martinez had operational fitness. Her running style, her pacing, her ability to maintain perfect form even at high speed. These weren't things you learned in high school track programs. They were things you learned when running meant survival. "Nice run, Martinez," he said as Sarah waited for the rest of the class to finish. "Thank you, Sergeant," she replied simply. "Where'd you learn to run like that?" Sarah met his eyes for a moment, and Rodriguez saw something there that confirmed his suspicions. "I've always liked running," she said. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Rodriguez had been in the military long enough to recognize a non-answer when he heard one. But he also knew that everyone had their secrets, and sometimes those secrets had good reasons for staying hidden. The rest of the fitness assessment went similarly. Sarah dominated the strength tests despite her small size, demonstrating technique and efficiency that impressed even Rodriguez. Her pull-ups were perfect, her push-ups flawless, and her agility scores were off the charts. By the end of the session, the other students were looking at Sarah with a mixture of confusion and respect. Madison, however, was looking at her with pure hatred. She had built her identity around being the best, the strongest, the fastest. Having that challenged by someone she considered inferior was unbearable. As the class headed back to the dormitory to shower and change, Madison fell into step beside Sarah. Her voice was low and angry. "I don't know what kind of performance-enhancing drugs you're on," she said, "but this isn't over. You might be fast, but speed isn't everything. We'll see how tough you really are when things get difficult." Sarah didn't respond, but she filed the threat away for future reference. Madison was the type of person who didn't handle losing well, and she had just lost very publicly. That made her dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with physical ability. Back in the dormitory, Sarah showered quickly and returned to her bunk. She could hear the other students talking in excited whispers about her performance, trying to figure out where she had come from and how she had gotten so fast. Some of the theories were close to the truth, others were wildly off base. "Maybe she's been training her whole life for this," suggested Trevor, the boy who had looked concerned for her before the run. "Or maybe she's genetically gifted," said another student. "Some people just have natural athletic ability." Madison's voice cut through the speculation. "Or maybe she's hiding something. People don't just show up out of nowhere and dominate like that. She's got secrets, and I'm going to find out what they are." Sarah continued reading her disguised manual, but she was listening to every word. Madison was smart and connected. If she decided to dig into Sarah's background, she might actually find something. That was a complication Sarah didn't need. The truth was that Sarah Martinez hadn't always been a student at Blackwater Academy. 6 months ago, she had been Petty Officer First Class Martinez, United States Navy SEALs. She had completed some of the most difficult military training in the world, served on classified operations in 3 different countries, and earned commendations that she would never be allowed to discuss publicly. But her SEAL career had ended abruptly when a training accident had left her with a severe concussion and symptoms that the Navy doctors couldn't fully explain. After months of medical evaluations and psychological assessments, she had been medically retired from active duty with full honors and a recommendation for civilian education. The transition from elite special operations to teenage student had been surreal. Going from leading combat missions to sitting in orientation sessions, from being respected for her abilities to being dismissed because of her appearance, it was like living in two different worlds. Sarah had chosen Blackwater Academy specifically because it was a military school where she could use her experience without having to explain it. The plan had been to keep her head down, get her degree, and figure out what to do with the rest of her life. She hadn't counted on people like Madison Thornfield. As the evening wore on, the dormitory settled into its routine. Students studied, chatted, and prepared for the next day's classes. Sarah continued reading, absorbing information about advanced reconnaissance techniques that she had once used in the field. Around 10 o'clock, Madison approached her bunk again. This time, she wasn't alone. Jessica and two other girls flanked her, providing both moral support and witnesses. "I've been thinking about today," Madison said, sitting on the edge of the bunk across from Sarah's. "That was pretty impressive running. Almost too impressive, if you know what I mean." Sarah looked up from her book. "I'm not sure what you're trying to say. I'm saying that normal people don't just show up and beat everyone on their first day. Normal people train for years to reach that level of fitness. So either you're not normal, or you're not who you claim to be." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could see that Madison was fishing, looking for any reaction that might confirm her suspicions. The smart thing to do would be to deflect, to give some innocent explanation that would satisfy Madison's curiosity. But Sarah was tired of being dismissed, tired of pretending to be less than she was, tired of people like Madison assuming they knew anything about her life. "Maybe," Sarah said quietly, "you just underestimated me." Madison's eyes narrowed. "I don't underestimate anyone. I do my research. I know everything there is to know about everyone in this dormitory. Except you. There's something you're not telling us." "Everyone has privacy," Sarah replied. "Not everything needs to be shared. In a place like this, secrets can be dangerous," Madison said. "We're going to be officers someday. We need to trust each other. How can we trust someone who won't be honest about who they really are?" It was a clever argument, and Sarah could see that some of the other students were listening now. Madison was framing Sarah's privacy as a betrayal of military values, as something that could endanger the group. It was manipulation, but it was effective manipulation. "I'm exactly who I claim to be," Sarah said. Sarah Martinez, student at Blackwater Academy. The next 3 weeks at Blackwater Academy followed a predictable pattern. Madison Thornfield had made it her mission to expose what she called Sarah's deception, while Sarah focused on her studies and tried to avoid confrontation. But in a closed environment like the academy, avoiding conflict was like trying to avoid breathing. Madison's campaign started subtly. She would make comments about Sarah's performance in front of other students, questioning how someone so small could be so strong. She arranged study groups that excluded Sarah, social events that happened to forget her invitation, and conversations that stopped whenever Sarah entered a room. "It's not natural," Madison told her inner circle during a late-night gathering in the dormitory common room. "Normal people don't have that kind of muscle memory. Did you see her during combat training today? She moved like she'd done it before." Jessica nodded eagerly. She had appointed herself as Madison's chief investigator, spending hours trying to find information about Sarah's background. "I looked her up online. There's almost nothing about her before she applied here. No social media, no news articles, no sports records. It's like she didn't exist until 6 months ago." "Exactly," Madison said. "People our age have digital footprints. We've been online our whole lives. But her? Nothing. She's either incredibly boring or incredibly careful. And boring people don't run 5-minute miles." Trevor, who had been listening from across the room, finally spoke up. "Maybe she just values her privacy. Not everyone needs to broadcast their whole life on the internet." Madison turned her cold blue eyes on him. "Whose side are you on, Trevor? Are you defending her because you think she's innocent, or because you have a crush on the mystery girl?" Trevor's face reddened. "I'm not on anyone's side. I just think maybe we're making too big a deal out of this. So what if she's athletic? Good for her. It's not just that she's athletic, Madison snapped. It's how she's athletic. I've been training my whole life, Trevor. I know what real fitness looks like. What she has isn't something you get from high school sports. It's something else. While Madison plotted in the common room, Sarah was in her bunk reading another disguised manual, this one covering advanced surveillance techniques. She could hear every word of Madison's conversation, and she knew that her situation was becoming more dangerous by the day. The truth was that Madison's instincts were correct. Sarah did have secrets, and they were exactly the kind that could get her kicked out of the academy if they were discovered in the wrong way. Her medical retirement from the SEALs was classified, her service record was sealed, and her presence at Blackwater was part of a carefully negotiated agreement with the Navy Department. If Madison dug deep enough, she might find official records that would raise uncomfortable questions. And if those questions reached the wrong people, Sarah's new life could end before it had really begun. The breaking point came during the Academy's monthly field training exercise. All students were required to participate in a 24-hour survival course that tested everything they had learned about navigation, shelter building, and emergency procedures. The exercise took place in a heavily wooded area about 30 miles from campus. Students were divided into teams of 4 and given basic supplies: a map, a compass, a knife, a length of rope, and emergency rations for one meal. Their task was to navigate to 3 different checkpoints scattered across 50 square miles of wilderness, then return to base camp before sunrise. Sarah had been assigned to a team with 3 other students who barely spoke to her: Madison's friend Jessica, a quiet boy named Marcus, and a girl named Amanda who seemed nervous about everything. It wasn't an accident that Sarah had ended up with this particular group. Madison had used her influence to ensure that Sarah would be stuck with people who either disliked her or wouldn't be much help. "This should be interesting," Jessica said as they stood at the starting line with their supplies. "I wonder if our mysterious teammate has any useful outdoor skills, or if we'll have to carry her through this exercise." Marcus, who came from a family of hunters and outdoorsmen, looked skeptical. "She doesn't exactly look like the camping type. We might be doing this exercise with basically 3 people. Amanda just looked worried. She had never spent a night outdoors in her life, and the thought of navigating through dark woods was terrifying. She had hoped to be paired with students who could compensate for her inexperience. Sarah listened to their assumptions without comment. She had completed survival training in environments that made this exercise look like a nature walk. Desert survival in Nevada, cold weather operations in Alaska, jungle warfare in Central America. Compared to that, a night in the Virginia woods was practically vacation. But revealing her expertise would raise questions she wasn't prepared to answer. So she shouldered her pack and prepared to play the role of the weak link, at least for as long as possible. The first checkpoint was 8 miles northeast of base camp, following a series of ridgelines that required careful navigation. Jessica had appointed herself team leader and was studying the map with obvious uncertainty. "I think we go this way," she said, pointing toward a trail that headed roughly east. Sarah looked at the map over Jessica's shoulder. The trail she had chosen would add at least 3 miles to their route, and would put them in a valley that could be dangerous if the weather turned bad. The correct route was a more direct path over higher ground that would be faster and safer. "Are you sure?" Sarah asked quietly. "It looks like this route might be more direct." Jessica pulled the map away protectively. "I've been reading maps since I was 10 years old. My family goes on camping trips every summer. I think I know what I'm doing." "I'm just suggesting we consider." "You're suggesting we waste time second-guessing the team leader," Jessica interrupted. "If you have experience with navigation that the rest of us don't know about, now would be a good time to share it." It was a trap, and Sarah recognized it immediately. If she demonstrated superior navigation skills, Jessica would report back to Madison that Sarah had more outdoor experience than a normal student should have. If she stayed quiet and let Jessica lead them on the wrong route, the team would struggle, and she would be blamed for not speaking up. Sarah chose to stay quiet, at least for now. She would let Jessica lead until the consequences became serious, then intervene only if necessary. They set off down Jessica's chosen trail as the afternoon sun filtered through the trees. The path was well maintained at first, but as they moved deeper into the woods, it became more overgrown and difficult to follow. Within 2 hours, they were making much slower progress than expected. Marcus was getting frustrated. Are you sure we're going the right way? I feel like we've been walking in circles. Jessica checked her compass again, but Sarah could see that she was holding it wrong, letting the magnetic declination throw off her readings. They were actually heading almost due south now, away from their intended checkpoint. We're fine, Jessica insisted. The trail just has a lot of switchbacks. We'll hit the checkpoint soon. Amanda was struggling to keep up. Her pack was too heavy for her small frame, and she wasn't used to hiking over rough terrain. Every few minutes, she had to stop to catch her breath, which slowed the team's progress even more. Maybe we should take a break, Sarah suggested after Amanda stumbled for the third time in 10 minutes. We don't have time for breaks, Jessica snapped. We're already behind schedule because some people can't keep up. Sarah could see that Amanda was close to tears. The girl was clearly exhausted and becoming dehydrated, but Jessica was too focused on maintaining her authority to notice the developing crisis. As the sun began to set, their situation became more serious. They had been walking for 6 hours and still hadn't reached the first checkpoint. Jessica's navigation had led them at least 4 miles off course, and now they were in unfamiliar terrain with darkness approaching. I think we might be lost, Marcus admitted, looking around at the dense forest that surrounded them. We're not lost, Jessica said, but her voice lacked conviction. I know exactly where we are. Where are we, then? Amanda asked weakly. She was sitting on a fallen log, looking pale and shaky. Jessica couldn't answer because she didn't actually know. Her overconfidence had led them deep into the woods with no clear way back to their intended route. She looked at the map again, but the symbols and contour lines seemed to blur together in the fading light. Maybe we should make camp here for the night, Marcus suggested. Try to figure out our position in the morning. No, Jessica said firmly. We're supposed to hit all 3 checkpoints. I'm not giving up because of one little navigation problem. Sarah had been watching this disaster unfold for hours, waiting to see if Jessica would admit her mistake and ask for help. But it was becoming clear that pride would prevent Jessica from acknowledging her errors, even if it put the team in danger. The decision was made for them when Amanda suddenly swayed and nearly fell off the log where she was sitting. Her face was flushed and she was breathing rapidly, classic signs of heat exhaustion and dehydration. Amanda? Sarah moved quickly to kneel beside the girl. How are you feeling? Dizzy, Amanda whispered. Really dizzy. And sick. Sarah checked Amanda's pulse, which was rapid and weak. Her skin was hot and dry, indicating that her body's cooling system was beginning to fail. Without immediate treatment, heat exhaustion could quickly progress to heat stroke, which could be fatal. We need to get her cooled down and rehydrated right away, Sarah said, already unpacking her water bottle. She's fine, Jessica protested. She just needs to toughen up. This is supposed to be challenging. Sarah ignored Jessica completely. She had seen heat casualties before, and she knew that Amanda was in serious trouble. Moving quickly but calmly, she helped Amanda lie down in the shade and elevated her feet. Then, she began giving her small sips of water while using a wet cloth to cool her forehead. What are you doing? Jessica demanded. You can't just take over like that. I'm keeping her from getting worse, Sarah replied without looking up. She needs medical attention, but first we need to stabilize her condition. Medical attention? She's just tired. You're being dramatic. Sarah finally looked up at Jessica, and her expression was so cold that Jessica took a step backward. She has heat exhaustion. If we don't treat it properly, she could go in a heat stroke and die. Is that dramatic enough for you? The authority in Sarah's voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a suggestion or a request. It was a professional assessment delivered by someone who clearly knew what she was talking about. Jessica found herself stepping back again, intimidated despite herself. Marcus had been watching the exchange with growing amazement. How do you know all this medical stuff? It was another test, another opportunity for Sarah to reveal more than she intended. But, with Amanda's life potentially at stake, Sarah was past caring about maintaining her cover. I've had some training, she said simply, continuing to monitor Amanda's vital signs. For the next hour, Sarah worked to stabilize Amanda's condition. She found a small stream nearby and used the cold water to help lower Amanda's core temperature. She rationed out water and electrolytes from their emergency supplies, managing Amanda's rehydration carefully to avoid shocking her system. While she worked, Jessica and Marcus stood by feeling increasingly useless. Both of them had first aid training from school, but nothing they had learned compared to the calm competence Sarah was displaying. She moved with the confidence of someone who had dealt with medical emergencies before, someone who knew exactly what to do and when to do it. "Is she going to be okay?" Marcus asked quietly. Sarah checked Amanda's pulse again. It was still weak, but had stabilized, and her breathing was becoming more regular. "I think so, but she needs rest and continued monitoring. We're not going anywhere tonight." "But the exercise," Jessica started to protest. "The exercise doesn't matter if someone gets seriously hurt," Sarah cut her off. "Real missions sometimes require changing plans to deal with unexpected situations." The word missions hung in the air for a moment before Sarah realized what she had said. Jessica's eyes narrowed as she filed the comment away for future reference. As night fell, Sarah took charge of setting up their campsite. She chose a location near the stream, but elevated enough to avoid flood risks. She built a fire that was large enough to provide warmth, but small enough to avoid attracting unwanted attention. She organized their supplies efficiently and established a watch schedule that would ensure Amanda was monitored throughout the night. "You seem to know a lot about camping," Marcus observed as he watched Sarah work. "I've spent some time outdoors," Sarah replied, not looking up from the fire she was building. "Where did you learn to build a fire like that?" Sarah's hands paused for just a moment. The fire she was building was a military-style fire, designed to burn hot with minimal smoke and to be easily concealed or extinguished. "It wasn't the kind of fire you learned at summer camp." "Trial and error," she said finally. Jessica had been watching Sarah work with growing suspicion. Everything about Sarah's behavior during this crisis had been wrong. Wrong for someone who was supposed to be an inexperienced city kid. Wrong for someone who claimed no special background or training. The medical knowledge was the most obvious red flag. Sarah hadn't just known what to do for Amanda. She had moved with the confidence of someone who had treated heat casualties before. Her assessment had been immediate and accurate, her treatment professional and effective. And then there were the small things. The way Sarah had evaluated their campsite for tactical advantages. The way she had built their fire for efficiency and concealment. The way she had organized their supplies like someone accustomed to managing critical resources. "You know," Jessica said casually as she sat across the fire from Sarah, "you handled that medical situation really well. Almost like you've done it before." Sarah continued tending the fire. Amanda was obviously sick. It didn't take special training to see that. "But the treatment you gave her was pretty sophisticated. Where did you learn to manage dehydration and heat exhaustion like that?" "Internet," Sarah said. "I read a lot." It was a weak answer, and they both knew it. The kind of knowledge Sarah had demonstrated didn't come from reading articles online. It came from practical experience, from training, from situations where lives had depended on making the right decisions quickly. "What kind of websites teach you to take a pulse like that?" Jessica pressed. "Because you checked her pulse like a paramedic. You knew exactly where to find it and how to evaluate what you were feeling." Sarah finally looked up. "Is there a point to these questions? I'm just curious about my teammates, especially when they turn out to have skills they haven't mentioned before. I helped someone who was sick. I'm sorry if that bothers you." "It doesn't bother me," Jessica said. "It interests me, because people don't usually have that kind of medical knowledge unless they've had professional training. And if you've had professional training, that raises questions about what else you might know." The conversation was interrupted when Amanda stirred and asked for water. Sarah immediately moved to check on her, taking her pulse and temperature, assessing her hydration level. Her movements were smooth and automatic, the result of muscle memory built through repetition. Marcus watched her work with growing admiration. "I don't know what we would have done without you. Amanda could have been in real trouble if you hadn't known how to help her." "Anyone could have done the same thing," Sarah said. But even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't true. She had responded to Amanda's crisis with training and experience that most people didn't have. "No," Marcus said firmly. "Anyone could have given her water and made her lie down. But you knew how much water to give her, how often, how to monitor her condition, when to worry and when not to worry. That's not common knowledge." Sarah felt the walls closing in. Every action she took to help Amanda had revealed more about her background. And now Jessica was putting together a picture that was getting dangerously close to the truth. I think she's stable enough that we should try to reach one of the emergency stations, Sarah said, changing the subject. They can radio for medical evacuation if needed. Emergency stations? Jessica asked. What emergency stations? Sarah realized she had made another mistake. The emergency stations were marked on the military maps she was used to reading, but not on the student exercise maps they had been given. She shouldn't have known they existed. I saw them mentioned in the exercise briefing, she lied. I read the same briefing, Jessica said. There was no mention of emergency stations. The lie was falling apart, and Sarah knew it. She had been operating on military knowledge and procedures that were second nature to her, but completely unknown to civilian students. Maybe I misunderstood something, Sarah said. Maybe you did. Or maybe you know things about this area that the rest of us don't. Before Sarah could respond, they heard voices in the distance. Someone was calling out, and the voices were getting closer. Within minutes, 2 academy instructors emerged from the tree line, carrying radios and first aid equipment. We got your emergency signal, one of them said, kneeling down next to Amanda. What's the situation? Sarah looked confused. Emergency signal? The instructor looked equally confused. Your emergency beacon. You activated it about 2 hours ago. We don't have an emergency beacon, Marcus said. The instructor frowned and checked his radio. Station 3, this is Field Team Alpha. Are you sure the signal came from this location? Affirmative, came the response. Emergency beacon activation at grid coordinates 347 to 521. Medical assistance requested. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Those were exactly the coordinates where they had made camp, coordinates she had calculated using landmarks and terrain features. But she hadn't activated any emergency beacon because she didn't know they had one, unless someone else had been watching them. The instructor was examining Amanda when Jessica spoke up. You should know that Martinez here provided excellent medical care. She seemed to know exactly what to do for heat exhaustion. Did she now? The instructor looked at Sarah with interest. What kind of training have you had, Martinez? It was the question Sarah had been dreading, asked by someone who would know the difference between civilian first aid and military medical training. She had to make a choice, continue lying and hope for the best, or reveal enough of the truth to satisfy his curiosity without exposing her full background. I've had some emergency medical training, she said carefully. What kind? EMT? Wilderness First Responder. Sarah knew that both of those certifications were easily verified. If she claimed either one, the instructor would check, and when he found no records, her situation would become much worse. Military training, she said finally. The word hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Jessica's eyes widened as pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicked into place. Marcus looked confused but impressed. The instructor nodded as if something he had suspected was finally confirmed. What branch? He asked. Navy, Sarah said, knowing that the truth would come out anyway. Navy Medical Corps? Sarah hesitated. Once she answered this question, there would be no going back to her quiet student life. But Amanda was sitting right there, recovering from a potentially serious medical emergency because of Sarah's intervention. There was no way to explain her knowledge without revealing her background. Special operations, she said quietly. Jessica gasped audibly. Marcus stared at Sarah as if seeing her for the first time. The instructor nodded again, as if confirming something he had already figured out. That explains a lot, he said. How long were you in? 6 years. Rank when you separated? Petty Officer First Class. The instructor was clearly doing mental calculations. To reach that rank in 6 years in special operations meant Sarah had been exceptional at her job. And to be here as a student now, rather than still serving, meant something significant had happened to end her military career. Medical retirement? He asked gently. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Well, the instructor said after a moment, explains why you knew how to handle this situation so well. Good work keeping her stable until we could get here. Amanda, who had been listening to this conversation with growing amazement, suddenly understood who had saved her life. You were a Navy SEAL? Something like that, Sarah said. Jessica was staring at Sarah with a mixture of shock and anger. All this time she had been trying to expose Sarah as a fraud, someone who was pretending to be more than she really was. Instead, she had discovered that Sarah was actually much more than she appeared to be. Madison is going to freak out when she hears about this, Jessica muttered. Sarah looked at her sharply. This doesn't need to become dormitory gossip. Are you kidding? You've been letting everyone think you were just some scholarship kid, when you're actually some kind of elite soldier? That's going to be the biggest news this place has seen in years. The instructor looked between them, sensing the tension. Martinez, why don't you help me get Amanda ready for transport? We'll discuss the rest of this later. The news of Sarah's military background spread through Blackwater Academy like wildfire. By the time she returned from the field exercise the next morning, every student in the dormitory was buzzing with rumors and speculation. The quiet scholarship girl who had seemed so unremarkable had turned out to be a former Navy SEAL, and nobody knew quite what to make of it. Sarah walked into the dormitory to find conversations stopping mid-sentence as she passed. Students who had barely noticed her before now stared openly, whispering to each other behind her back. Some looked impressed, others looked skeptical, and a few looked genuinely intimidated. Madison Thornfield was waiting in the common room, surrounded by her usual circle of followers. Her face was a mask of cold fury, and when she saw Sarah, her blue eyes blazed with something that went beyond ordinary anger. Well, Madison said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Look who's back. Our very own little war hero. Sarah set down her gear bag and looked at Madison calmly. Is there a problem? Oh, I think there are several problems, Madison replied, standing up and moving closer. The biggest one being that you've been lying to everyone since the day you arrived. I haven't lied about anything. Really? When we asked you about your background, did you mention that you were a professional killer? When we wondered how you could run so fast, did you explain that you'd been trained by the military to be a human weapon? The accusation was designed to make Sarah look like a dangerous deception, someone who had infiltrated their peaceful academic community under false pretenses. And it was working. Sarah could see other students backing away slightly, looking uncertain and worried. I'm a student here, just like you, Sarah said quietly. My previous career doesn't change that. Madison laughed harshly. Previous career? Is that what we're calling it? You weren't working in an office, Martinez. You were killing people for the government. I served my country, Sarah replied, her voice still level but with an edge that made several students step back further. I'm proud of that service. I bet you are. But the question is, what are you really doing here? Because I don't believe for a second that someone with your background just decided to become a normal college student. It was a clever attack, and Madison was building on fears that some of the other students probably shared. What was a former special operations soldier doing at their academy? Was she there to spy on them? To recruit them? To study them for some unknown government purpose? Trevor, who had been listening to the exchange with growing discomfort, finally stepped forward. Come on, Madison. You're being ridiculous. She's here to get an education, just like the rest of us. Stay out of this, Trevor, Madison snapped. This doesn't concern you. Actually, it does concern me. And everyone else here. Because you're trying to turn us against someone based on nothing but paranoia and jealousy. Madison's face flushed red. Jealousy? You think I'm jealous of her? I think you're angry because she made you look bad during PT, and now you're even angrier because you found out she had a legitimate reason for being better than you. The comment hit its mark. Madison had built her identity around being the best, the strongest, the most capable student at the academy. Having that challenged by someone she had dismissed as inferior had been humiliating. Learning that the person who had beaten her was a former elite soldier made the humiliation even worse. This isn't about PT scores, Madison said, but her voice was less certain now. This is about honesty, about trust. How can we trust someone who's been hiding the truth about who she really is? How can we trust someone who's been bullying and harassing other students since day one? Trevor shot back. At least Sarah's secrets didn't hurt anyone. Your behavior has been making people miserable for weeks. The exchange was drawing a crowd now. Students from other dormitories had heard the commotion and were gathering to watch. Sarah realized that this confrontation was becoming a defining moment for her time at the academy. How she handled Madison's attack would determine whether she could continue her studies in peace or whether she would face constant harassment. You want to know the truth? Sarah said, her voice cutting through the argument. Fine. Here's the truth. The room fell silent. Even Madison stopped talking, recognizing that something important was about to happen. I joined the Navy when I was 18 because I wanted to serve my country and because I needed the education benefits to afford college. I qualified for special operations training and served with honor for 6 years. I was medically retired after a training accident that left me with injuries the Navy doctors couldn't fully treat. Sarah paused, looking around the room at all the faces watching her. I came here because I want to finish my education and figure out what to do with the rest of my life. I didn't tell people about my background because I wanted to be judged as a student, not as a former soldier. I wanted to start fresh. And you think you can just pretend your past doesn't exist? Madison asked. You think you can hide who you really are? I'm not hiding who I am, Sarah replied. I'm exactly who I've always said I was. Sarah Martinez, student. The fact that I used to have a different job doesn't change that. Jessica, who had been watching from the edge of the crowd, decided to add fuel to the fire. But you're not really a normal student, are you? You're here on some kind of special program. The government is probably paying your tuition. It was another accurate guess, and Sarah felt the walls closing in again. The truth was that her education at Blackwater was being funded through a veterans rehabilitation program that was designed to help medically retired special operations personnel transition to civilian careers. But explaining that would only raise more questions about her injuries and the circumstances of her retirement. My funding is my business, Sarah said. Is it? Madison asked. Because if the government is paying for you to be here, that means you're here for a reason. You're not just some random veteran trying to get a degree. You're here on a mission. The paranoia in Madison's voice was becoming more obvious, and Sarah could see that some of the other students were starting to look skeptical. Madison was pushing too hard, making accusations that sounded more like conspiracy theories than legitimate concerns. What kind of mission would that be? Trevor asked sarcastically. Secret agent training? Infiltrating the academy to steal our advanced knowledge of military history and leadership theory. A few students laughed, and Sarah could see Madison's support beginning to erode. Her accusations were becoming too extreme, too disconnected from reality. But Madison wasn't ready to give up. She had one more card to play, one more way to turn the situation against Sarah. You want to know what I think? Madison said, raising her voice to address the entire crowd. I think she's dangerous. I think someone who's been trained to kill people, someone who's probably suffering from PTSD or other psychological problems, doesn't belong in a school with normal students. The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Madison had found the one vulnerability that Sarah couldn't easily defend against. The suggestion that she might be psychologically unstable, that her military service had somehow damaged her, that she posed a threat to other students. That's enough, Sarah said, her voice carrying a tone of command that made several students step back involuntarily. You can question my motives, you can doubt my honesty, but you don't get to make accusations about my mental health. Why not? Madison pressed. Everyone knows that soldiers come back from war with problems. PTSD, anger issues, violent tendencies. How do we know you won't snap someday and hurt someone? The room had gone completely silent now. Madison had crossed a line that everyone recognized, making personal attacks based on ugly stereotypes about veterans and mental health. But she had also touched on fears that some students probably did have about sharing space with someone who had been trained for combat. Sarah looked around the room at all the faces watching her, trying to decide how to respond. She could see fear in some of their eyes now, uncertainty about whether Madison might be right. The careful work she had done to fit in, to seem normal and non-threatening, was crumbling in front of her. You're right about one thing, Sarah said finally. I do have problems from my military service. I have nightmares sometimes. I have trouble sleeping. I get nervous in crowds, and I don't like loud noises. Madison looked triumphant, as if Sarah had just confirmed everything she had been saying. But you know what else I have? Sarah continued. I have discipline. I have training in how to control my responses and manage my emotions. I have experience working under pressure and making life or death decisions without losing my head. She stepped closer to Madison, and several people moved back to give them space. What I don't have is the luxury of falling apart when things get difficult. I don't have the option of bullying other people when I feel insecure about myself. And I don't have the time or energy to waste on petty jealousy and mean-spirited gossip. Madison's face was getting redder as Sarah spoke. You think you're better than us. You think your military service makes you special. No, Sarah said. I think it makes me different. But not better and not worse. Just different. Different how? Madison challenged. What can you do that we can't? It was exactly the wrong question to ask, and Sarah could see that Madison realized it as soon as the words left her mouth. But it was too late to take them back, and the challenge hung in the air between them. You really want to know? Sarah asked quietly. Something in her tone made Madison take a step backward. For the first time since the confrontation had started, she looked uncertain. I want to know what makes you think you're so special, Madison said. But her voice had lost some of its confidence. Sarah looked around the room one more time, then made a decision that would change everything. Fine, she said, but not here. If you want to see what makes me different, we'll do it properly. Tomorrow morning, PT time. You can set the challenge. Whatever you think will prove your point. Madison's eyes narrowed. Any challenge. Any physical challenge you want. Running, strength, agility, combat training. Your choice. And when you lose? If I lose, I'll request a transfer to another school. You'll never have to see me again. And if you win? Sarah's smile was cold and professional. If I win, you leave me alone. No more harassment, no more investigation, no more gossip. We coexist peacefully for the rest of the year. Madison looked around the room, realizing that she had painted herself into a corner. She had made such a big deal about Sarah's military background being irrelevant, about her not being as special as she thought, that backing down now would make her look weak and foolish. Deal, she said finally. What's the challenge? Madison thought for a moment, then smiled. She thought she had found a way to humiliate Sarah and prove her point at the same time. Obstacle course. The Academy's advanced tactical course that they use for senior students. We'll see how much of your training you actually remember. Sarah nodded. Fair enough. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. I'll be there, Madison said. And so will everyone else. They should see what happens when someone gets too confident about their abilities. As the crowd began to disperse, students talking excitedly about the upcoming competition, Sarah realized what she had just committed herself to. The advanced tactical course at Blackwater Academy was designed to challenge senior students who had 3 years of military training. It included climbing walls, rope traversals, weapons handling, and combat scenarios that most college students would find impossible. But Madison had made a crucial mistake in her choice of challenge. She had picked something that played directly to Sarah's strengths, something that would demonstrate exactly why Navy SEAL training was considered among the best in the world. Trevor approached Sarah as she gathered her gear. Are you sure about this? Madison's been training here for 3 years. She knows that course better than anyone. I'm sure, Sarah said. But what if you lose? You'll have to leave the academy. Sarah looked at him with an expression that reminded him that he was talking to someone who had voluntarily jumped out of airplanes into enemy territory. I won't lose, she said simply. That night, Sarah lay in her bunk thinking about the challenge ahead. She hadn't run a tactical course since her injury, and she didn't know how her body would respond to the kind of stress she was about to put it under. But Madison had made a fundamental error in challenging Sarah's military skills instead of targeting her weaknesses. The truth was that obstacle courses and tactical challenges were exactly what Navy SEALs trained for every day. Sarah had run similar courses hundreds of times, under conditions much more difficult than anything Blackwater Academy could devise. She had done it while exhausted, while injured, while carrying heavy equipment, and while being shot at by people who were trying to kill her. Madison, for all her athletic ability and 3 years of academy training, had never faced anything like that. She was about to discover the difference between being a good student-athlete and being a professional warrior. As word of the challenge spread throughout the academy, students began placing bets and taking sides. Most of the money was on Madison, who was known for her athletic abilities and her intimate knowledge of the course. But a few students who had heard details about Sarah's military service were putting their money on the underdog. The confrontation had escalated beyond what either Sarah or Madison had originally intended. What had started as a personal conflict between two students was now becoming a public test that would be witnessed by much of the academy. The outcome would determine not just who was physically superior, but who had the right to define their own identity at the school. Madison spent the evening reviewing videos of the tactical course, studying every obstacle and planning her strategy. She was confident in her abilities and familiar with every challenge she would face. More importantly, she was motivated by a burning desire to prove that Sarah Martinez was nothing special, just another veteran who was living in the past and trading on undeserved reputation. Sarah spent the evening reading and trying to prepare mentally for what was coming. She knew that her performance tomorrow would be watched and analyzed by everyone at the academy. If she won decisively, it would establish her credibility and in Madison's campaign against her. If she lost, she would be forced to leave the only place where she had felt like she might be able to build a new life. But there was another factor that neither Madison nor the betting students had considered. Sarah Martinez hadn't just been any Navy SEAL. Her service record, if they could have seen it, would have shown commendations for actions under fire, successful completions of missions that other units had failed to accomplish, and performance ratings that had placed her in the top 5% of her peer group. Madison was about to challenge someone who had been tested under the most extreme Condit dawn broke gray and cold over Blackwater Academy, with a thin mist hanging over the tactical training grounds. By 6:30 in the morning, word of the challenge had spread to every corner of the campus. Students gathered along the perimeter of the advanced tactical course, creating an impromptu arena for what many were calling the most significant confrontation in the Academy's recent history. Sarah arrived at exactly 7 a.m., wearing the standard Academy PT uniform and carrying nothing but a water bottle. She looked smaller than ever among the crowd of spectators, and several students whispered about how unfair the challenge seemed. Madison Thornfield was nearly 6 inches taller, outweighed her by 40 pounds, and had 3 years of experience with this specific course. Madison arrived 5 minutes later, flanked by her usual supporters, and clearly enjoying the attention. She had trained on this course hundreds of times, and knew every obstacle, every trick, every shortcut that could shave seconds off her time. More importantly, she was motivated by 3 years of accumulated resentment towards students she considered beneath her. Master Sergeant Rodriguez emerged from the equipment building carrying a stopwatch and a clipboard. He had volunteered to officiate the challenge, partly out of curiosity about what Sarah Martinez would actually show them. He had suspected there was more to her story than she had revealed, and yesterday's events had confirmed his instincts. "All right, ladies," Rodriguez called out. "Let me explain the rules. This is a standard run of the advanced tactical course. Climbing wall, rope traverse, weapons handling station, combat crawl, precision shooting, and urban combat scenario. Best time wins. Any questions?" Madison raised her hand. "What about safety equipment?" "Same as always. Helmets for climbing, gloves for rope work, protective gear for combat scenarios. Standard Academy safety protocols apply." Sarah nodded her understanding. She had run similar courses dozens of times, though always with live ammunition and real consequences for failure. Running it as a training exercise would feel almost relaxing by comparison. The advanced tactical course at Blackwater Academy was designed to challenge senior students who had completed 3 years of military education. It began with a 20-foot climbing wall that required both upper body strength and technical skill. From there, it moved to a rope traverse over a water obstacle, followed by a weapons handling station where students had to field strip and reassemble an M4 rifle while under time pressure. After the weapons station came a 100-yard combat crawl under simulated machine gun fire, represented by tennis balls fired from automatic launchers. Then, a precision shooting gallery where students had to hit 8 targets at various distances with a pistol. The course concluded with an urban combat scenario involving multiple rooms, hidden targets, and tactical decision-making under pressure. Most senior students needed 15 to 20 minutes to complete the entire course. The Academy record was held by a graduating senior who had finished in 12 minutes and 37 seconds. Madison's personal best was 13 minutes and 15 seconds, achieved after months of practice and preparation. "Martinez, you're up first," Rodriguez announced. Sarah stepped to the starting line and looked at the obstacle course stretching out ahead of her. It was almost identical to courses she had trained on during her SEAL preparation, though significantly easier than what she had faced in advanced training facilities. The climbing wall was lower, the rope traverse was shorter, and the combat scenarios were simplified compared to what she was used to. "Ready?" Rodriguez asked. Sarah nodded, settling into a ready position that looked deceptively relaxed. Her breathing was controlled, her muscles loose but prepared to explode into action. She looked like she was preparing for a casual jog rather than a challenging tactical course. "Go!" Sarah launched herself toward the climbing wall with a burst of speed that caught everyone off guard. She hit the wall at full sprint and went up it like gravity didn't apply to her. Her movements were fluid and economical, each handhold and foothold precisely placed for maximum efficiency. She topped the wall in less than 30 seconds, a time that would have been impressive for the climbing wall alone. The crowd murmured in surprise as Sarah dropped down the other side and sprinted toward the rope traverse. This obstacle had ended the runs of several senior students who lacked the upper body strength to complete it. Sarah reached the rope at full speed, leaped to grab it, and began moving across the water obstacle below. Her technique was perfect. Instead of the hand-over-hand method most students used, Sarah moved in a smooth rhythm that incorporated her entire body, maintaining momentum while conserving energy. She crossed the 40-foot gap in less than a minute, dropping to the ground on the far side without apparent effort. Madison watched in growing concern as Sarah approached the weapons handling station. This was supposed to be Madison's strongest area, where her 3 years of academy training would give her a decisive advantage. Sarah might be athletic, but weapons handling required specific knowledge and muscle memory that came only from extensive practice. Sarah picked up the disassembled M4 rifle and examined it briefly. The weapon was similar to one she had used in service, but not identical. The academy used civilian training versions that were modified for safety and educational purposes. Sarah spent about 5 seconds familiarizing herself with the differences, then began reassembly. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, each motion economical and sure. Parts clicked together in a rhythm that spoke of thousands of repetitions under various conditions. She completed the assembly in 43 seconds, checked the weapon's function, then disassembled it again in 35 seconds. Rodriguez looked at his stopwatch in amazement. Sarah had just broken the academy record for the weapons handling station by more than 20 seconds. The combat crawl section was next, requiring students to move under low barriers while tennis balls simulated enemy fire. Most students found this section exhausting, requiring them to crawl on their bellies while maintaining speed and staying below the barrier height. Sarah approached the section and immediately dropped into a combat crawl that was so low and so fast that she looked like she was barely touching the ground. Her movement was silent despite the speed, and she navigated the serpentine course without triggering any of the enemy fire sensors. The crowd was completely silent now, watching something they had never seen before. This wasn't a student-athlete running a training course. This was a professional warrior demonstrating skills that most of them couldn't even comprehend. Sarah emerged from the crawl section and sprinted to the shooting gallery. 8 targets at distances from 10 to 50 yards, pistol loaded with 10 rounds. Students were allowed to miss 2 targets and still pass the section, but were penalized time for each miss. Sarah picked up the weapon, checked its condition, and acquired her first target in one smooth motion. The pistol cracked 8 times in rapid succession, each shot precisely placed. 8 targets, 8 hits, no misses. Her shooting stance and technique were textbook perfect, the result of intensive training and combat experience. Rodriguez was no longer looking at his stopwatch in amazement. He was looking at it in disbelief. Sarah was on pace to obliterate every record the Academy had ever kept. The final section was the urban combat scenario, a maze of rooms and corridors with pop-up targets representing enemies and civilians. Students had to navigate the scenario while making tactical decisions about when to engage targets and when to hold fire. Most students found this section the most challenging because it required mental agility as well as physical skill. Sarah entered the urban combat area and seemed to transform. Her casual, almost relaxed demeanor disappeared, replaced by the focused intensity of someone moving through hostile territory. She flowed through the rooms like water, checking corners, clearing angles, engaging targets with mechanical efficiency. Her tactical movement was flawless. She used cover and concealment naturally, never exposing herself unnecessarily, always maintaining awareness of potential threats from multiple directions. When she engaged targets, her shots were quick and accurate. When she encountered civilian targets mixed with enemy targets, her target discrimination was instantaneous and correct. She completed the urban combat scenario without missing a single target or making a single tactical error. As she emerged from the final room, the crowd erupted in stunned applause. Rodriguez looked at his stopwatch and had to check it twice before he believed what he was seeing. 9 minutes, 47 seconds, he announced. New Academy record by almost 3 minutes. Sarah walked back to the starting area, breathing normally and showing no signs of the exertion that would have left most students exhausted. She looked like she had just completed a moderate warm-up exercise. Madison stared at the scoreboard in shock. She had been preparing to run a tactical course against another student. What she had just witnessed was a professional demonstration by someone whose abilities were so far beyond her own that comparison was meaningless. "Your turn," Sarah said quietly. Madison stepped to the starting line knowing that she had already lost. There was no possible way for her to match what she had just seen. But backing down now would be an even greater humiliation, so she prepared to complete the course as best she could. "Ready?" Rodriguez asked. Madison nodded, though she felt anything but ready. "Go." Madison launched herself at the climbing wall with determination and excellent technique. Her form was textbook perfect, and she completed the obstacle efficiently. But where Sarah had seemed to flow up the wall, Madison had to work for every foot of progress. The rope traverse went well for Madison. This was one of her strongest areas, and her upper body strength served her well. She crossed the gap cleanly and dropped to the far side with confidence restored. At the weapons handling station, Madison's extensive practice paid off. Her disassembly and reassembly times were excellent by normal standards, though still more than 30 seconds slower than Sarah's performance. She completed the task with precision and moved on to the combat crawl. The crawl section was where Madison began to struggle. She was strong and fit, but she lacked the specific conditioning for this type of movement. By the halfway point, she was breathing hard, and her form was beginning to deteriorate. She completed the section successfully, but had lost significant time. At the shooting gallery, Madison's performance was solid but not spectacular. She hit 7 of 8 targets, missing one shot at 40 yards that she would normally have made easily. The pressure of competition and the knowledge that she was being compared to Sarah's perfect performance had affected her concentration. The urban combat scenario was Madison's weakest area. While she understood the tactical principles in theory, she lacked the practical experience to apply them smoothly. Her movement through the rooms was correct but cautious, and her decision-making was slow compared to Sarah's instinctive responses. When Madison emerged from the final room, she was exhausted and knew that her performance had been adequate, but far from exceptional. She had run a respectable course by normal standards, but nothing that could compete with what Sarah had demonstrated. 14 minutes, 23 seconds, Rodriguez announced. "Excellent run, Thornfield. Well within senior student standards." Madison nodded, accepting the praise even though it felt hollow. She had lost the challenge by more than 4 minutes, a margin that made clear how completely she had been outclassed. The crowd began to disperse, students talking excitedly about what they had witnessed. Several approached Sarah to congratulate her or ask questions about her technique. She answered politely, but briefly, uncomfortable with the attention. Madison stood near the equipment shed, surrounded by her usual supporters, but feeling completely alone. She had spent 3 years building her reputation as the Academy's best athlete, only to see it demolished in less than 10 minutes by someone she had dismissed as weak and irrelevant. "That was impressive," Jessica said, trying to sound supportive. "She destroyed me," Madison replied flatly. "It wasn't even close." "You ran a good course," another friend offered. "Your time was perfectly respectable." Madison looked at her with contempt. "Perfectly respectable? Do you understand what just happened here? She didn't just beat me. She beat me so badly that it made me look like an amateur." The truth of the situation was beginning to sink in for everyone who had watched the challenge. Sarah Martinez wasn't just a former military person trying to fit in at a civilian school. She was an elite professional warrior whose abilities were so far beyond normal human performance that comparison was almost meaningless. Rodriguez approached Madison as she prepared to leave the area. "You ran a good course, Thornfield. Don't let this get you down." "How?" Madison asked. "How do I not let this get me down? Everything I thought I knew about myself, about my abilities, about my place here, it's all wrong." Rodriguez studied her for a moment. "You know what your problem is? You thought this was about physical ability. You thought if you could prove you were stronger or faster or more skilled, you'd win. Wasn't it?" "No," Rodriguez said. "This was about experience. About what happens when someone who's been tested under real conditions faces someone who's only been tested in training scenarios." He gestured towards Sarah, who was talking quietly with Trevor near the edge of the crowd. "Martinez didn't beat you because she's naturally superior. She beat you because she's done things you can't imagine. She's been places where failure means death, where there's no second chance, where everything you've learned has to work perfectly the first time." Madison was quiet for a long moment. "So what am I supposed to do now? Just accept that I'll never be as good as her?" "You're supposed to learn from her," Rodriguez said. "You're supposed to realize that there are different levels of excellence, and that recognizing someone else's superiority doesn't diminish your own worth." "Easy for you to say. You didn't just get humiliated in front of the entire academy." "No," Rodriguez agreed. "But I've been humiliated by people who were better than me. It's how you learn where you really stand in the world." As the training area emptied, Sarah found herself alone with her thoughts for the first time since the challenge had begun. She had won decisively, establishing her credibility and ending Madison's campaign against her. But she also knew that her performance had raised new questions about her background and her reasons for being at the academy. The demonstration had been necessary to stop Madison's harassment, but it had also revealed more about her capabilities than she had intended. There would be new rumors now, new speculation about what she had really done during her military service and why she had left. Trevor approached her as she prepared to head back to the dormitory. "That was incredible. I've never seen anything like it." "Thank you," Sarah said simply. "Is that what SEAL training is really like? Are you all able to do things like that?" Sarah considered the question carefully. Everyone who completes the training is capable of excellent performance. But not everyone reaches the same level. "What level did you reach?" It was the kind of question she had been dreading, but Trevor had been one of the few students to treat her fairly from the beginning. He deserved an honest answer. "I was good at my job," she said. "Good enough to do things most people couldn't do." Ian's possible and had proven herself again and again when lives depended on her performance. The morning would reveal which type of training was superior: 3 years of academy instruction or 6 years of military service where failure meant death. As the dormitory settled into sleep, both women lay awake preparing for a battle that would determine their futures at Blackwater Academy. Neither of them fully understood what they had committed themselves to, or how completely the outcome would change their lives. The war was about to reach its decisive moment. Academy was officially over. By tomorrow, everyone would know about her military background. Madison would have all the ammunition she needed to make Sarah's life miserable in new and creative ways. But looking down at Amanda, who was alert and stable thanks to her intervention, Sarah found that she didn't regret her choices. Some things were more important than maintaining cover. Some battles were worth fighting, even when you knew they would cost you everything else. The real war was about to begin. "Everything else is my business." Madison smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "We'll see about that. This school has a way of revealing who people really are. And when it does, I'll be watching." The threat was clear, and Sarah understood that her peaceful plan of keeping her head down had just become impossible. Madison had made this personal, and she wouldn't stop until she had either destroyed Sarah or discovered her secrets. As the lights went out, and the dormitory settled into sleep, Sarah lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling. She had hoped to leave her military life behind, to start fresh as just another student. But some battles couldn't be avoided, and some enemies wouldn't be satisfied with anything less than total victory. Madison Thornfield thought she was dealing with a weak scholarship student who had gotten lucky on a fitness test. She had no idea that she had just declared war on someone who had been trained to fight battles that most people couldn't even imagine. The real test was just beginning.